Hi, I'm Richard Lacao, and I'm the art critic of Time magazine. I'm here at the New York Botanical Garden to do a tour of Moore in America, which is a very unusual show of work by the great British sculptor Henry Moore. Let's start with this piece right here. It's called Oval with Points, and it's a bronze from 1968 to 1970. Moore was fascinated by the forms of nature, and he incorporated them into his work. He was a great collector of stones, of bones, of natural formations, pieces of wood. This particular piece is actually based upon an elephant's skull, one of which Moore owned. He was fascinated by the forms of the skull, by the voids, the open spaces within it, and by the slightly sinister connotation of the 2 points reaching out towards one another. Nothing about this sculpture says it's a picture of a skull, but everything about it says that it's a form somehow taken from nature that has something mordant about it. Moore is an artist who's really best captured on video rather than, say, still photography, because each of the pieces gives itself up differently from every angle. He very much intended that sculpture should be a three-dimensional, 360-degree experience.
Moore particularly admired the art of non-European cultures, things like African wood carving and pre-Columbian stone sculpture. One of his early inspirations were Mayan chacmuls, statues of a reclining figure leaning on its elbows. He incorporated the memory of that form into the many reclining figures that he made all throughout his life.
This is knife-edge two-piece from 1962 to 65, and it may look like 2 pieces of toast.
It's actually based partly on geological formations. Moore grew up in the north of England, not far from the rugged hill country of Yorkshire. And as you begin to move around this piece, it presents itself as something like a ravine between 2 sheer cliffs. Although from certain angles it looks like a wall, for Moore, the space between the 2 main volumes, that long crevasse, was as important as the volumes themselves. As you circle the piece, that negative space is continually brought alive by the undulations of the bronze walls that form it. Moore was so fond of this piece that he had it placed within sight of his home, a place he called Hoglands in the Hertfordshire countryside outside of London.
This is Hill Arches from 1973. And it's a good example of Moore's ability to make a form that suggests more than one thing, more than 3 things, more than 5 things. In some ways, this is a natural formation, a hill. And in other ways, it obviously suggests arches, architectural forms. In fact, it's almost a kind of a building that you can walk through in itself. And the New York Botanical Garden has wisely cited it in front of their Mertz Library, with its arched windows that are so much like the archways that Moore was thinking about when he made this piece.
But there's something anthropomorphic about these forms, too. Something about them that suggests people interacting, approaching one another, tumbling, embracing. There's something playful about it.
This is draped reclining mother and baby from 1983, and it's one of the enduring motifs of Moore's career. Throughout his life, he continually returned to the theme of a mother and child. He had close relations with his own mother. He found his father a little bit distant.
This piece is probably a good place to mention the ups and downs of Moore's reputation. In the years right after World War II, Moore was celebrated as something like the embodiment of the modern artist. Picasso may have been more famous, but I think it's fair to say Moore was more beloved. His work seemed to strike just the right balance between representation and abstraction, between the recognizable and the mysterious. He was especially popular in the U.S., where for years the fastest way for a city or a university campus to declare itself in tune with the modern age was to acquire a big, distinguished Henry Moore. But by the 1960s, there was a backlash among certain critics and also by a new generation of artists, pop artists, minimalists, who thought that a lot of Moore's work looked corny and obvious. Sometimes they had a point. Throughout his long life, he was 88 when he died in 1986, Moore had powerful ideas, but he also had a sentimental side. It was one of the reasons for his popularity in the first place, and it comes out in particular in some of his mother and child pairings.
This is one of my favorite pieces in this show. It's called 2-Piece Reclining Figure Points, and it's from 1969. And it demonstrates something that was basic to Moore's approach to sculpture throughout his career. In the mid-1930s, he started to divide his reclining figures into 2 pieces. And sometimes in later pieces, he divided them into 3 parts. He felt that this automatically rendered the figure more abstract, which it certainly did, even as it still held a memory of the human form. And I think you can understand very well what he was getting at in a piece like this.
This is a piece that suggests the swells and inlets of the human body. It brings to mind limbs, sometimes amputated limbs. Yet it's so abstract that at the same time it begins to suggest a geological formation, the way the Sphinx does. You can see that in some places Moore has polished the bronze, so that it's smooth and suggests skin. But in other places it's rough and striated, so that it resembles rock.
But at the very, very top of this piece, Moore has also left a clear hint that this is a human figure. That's a face. It has 3 little dots in it, 2 for eyes and 1 for a mouth. It's the most basic abstraction of a human figure, but it brings the piece back down to earth. The Botanical Garden is not encouraging people to climb up on the sculptures, so don't expect to be able to do this if you come here. But I came up here to make a point about the enveloping form in the Moore sculpture. This one's called 3-Piece Reclining Figure Draped from 1975. And it also uses a lot of Moore's themes and brings them all together. The division of the human form into 3 different forms, the use of negative space, like the one I'm standing in, as a part of the sculptural experience, the sculptural quality that suggests an anatomical form and yet at the same time has an abstract character, the amputated limbs, like that you see there, and the very simplified human face, like the one up above.
Moore once called sculpture an art of the open air, and that was certainly true of his sculpture. This show at the New York Botanical Garden is a perfect way to experience it.